We're at a historical low right now. Only 32% of Americans right now have any reasonable faith in the ability of the mainstream media to deliver news factually. Where this distrust lies, it comes from the fact that big mainstream media corporations, they're held to their own political agendas, very specific political agendas, and they pander to a very particular audience. You have organizations that skew very liberal, and you have, the other half of the organization that skew very conservative, and you can almost tell what their perspectives are on certain topics before even reading the article. So a lot of this comes down to transparency. I think the beauty of the blockchain is everything is trustless. Having this sort of tokenized economy on DNN and having this mix of incentives and penalties for all the users participating on the network, I do feel that there could be a certain level of trust that gets attained.
Welcome to a DNN Town Hall, the first in a series of town hall events with a record number of Americans distrusting media. We're talking today about accountability in the news. Today I'm joined by Sumit Singh and Dondre Taylor from Decentralized News Network. Welcome. Now let's get started. I want to start off with a question about living in a post-truth era. Do you believe that we live in a post-truth era?
I definitely do. To an extent, it's not so much that facts are becoming less important, but I think that we as people are kind of, I guess, paying less attention to what's factual and what's not, because we're all kind of inhabiting these so-called echo chambers. We're kind of dealing with articles that are pumped out by writers that basically mirror our own confirmation biases and whatnot, not to mention the current polarization in the mass media world. And I do think to a high extent we are living in a post-truth society for sure.
So, Dondre, I want to ask you, how did DNN start, and what was the inspiration for it?
Yeah, so, the whole idea for DNN came around the time of the U.S. election. So, because we were in the U.S., we dealt a great, seeing a lot of how the different news organizations were covering different topics. And one of the things we started noticing is just how biased each of the news organizations cover certain things. In addition to that, you had things coming out that were just blatantly false. For the most part, the polls had showed that Hillary was in the lead by huge percentage points, but then the outcome of the election showed that it was entirely different. So kind of got us thinking about rather than have these organizations pumping out articles that tilt to or pander to their bases, it'd be nice to kind of involve the community in constructing news that is purely factual, purely vetted by the community. Just involving more people in the process. When we consume the news, we're very passive, right? We kind of just look at the headlines. We don't actually look at the contents of the article sometimes. And a lot of these articles that come out even have kind of no sources to them. So it's kind of interesting to see, a platform like DNN come about where involve the community.
And I'm curious, what role do you see DNN playing in the future of political news? And I'll just sort of touch as well, Sumit, you had mentioned something about echo chambers, and I'm curious, in the future of political news, are we going to keep on having these echo chambers just talking to themselves, or do you see DNN breaking some of those echo chambers open?
So I'm going to answer that first question. In the short term, when it comes to just the future mass media as a whole, I do see us playing a part in delivering a well-balanced factual news to our readers and becoming a place where I guess people can be exposed to all sorts of different perspectives, not just their own, which is what we deal with when it comes to platforms like Facebook and Twitter. We all inhabit these echo chambers on the biggest social media platforms. We're only exposed to more of what we like. So I feel like the only way to break down those silos, so to speak, is to have a platform that doesn't pander to any bigger political agenda. Mm-hmm. So I'd say in the long term, when it comes to addressing the issues of mass media, we don't necessarily want everyone to question every single piece of what they read on a daily basis, but rather to open an ongoing discussion about the issues that matter to us most. Because one of the biggest things that's lacking is an open dialogue. None of us really openly engage back and forth, about issues that we'd like to shed light on, because we all think a certain way about a certain issue, and we continue consuming the news that appeals to us on a conscious level rather than criticizing what we read. So there definitely needs to be a more open dialogue, and we definitely like to sort of help people build up a higher degree of media literacy and basically research everything that they're reading and compare and contrast different perspectives of issues.
Now, I know that DNN is backed by the blockchain technology, and I'm curious to hear from you, D'Andre. What is, first of all, blockchain technology, and how do you see DNN using it to combat fake news?
Yeah, so real simply, the blockchain I'd like to think of as just a database, a public database that anybody has access to add things to, but not necessarily delete. So just to draw an example, if you can just kind of envision an Excel spreadsheet that's shared among the public, anybody can add entries to it, but no one can delete entries from it. And basically anybody who wants to copy this Excel spreadsheet on their computer can get a reward in the form of crypto tokens. So that's more or less what the blockchain is, and we definitely saw it being very appealing to us, purely from two perspectives. One is the anti-censorship that's kind of like built right into it, and then the other thing is the incentivization layer. So the great thing about blockchain is you have these things called tokens, and these tokens can kind of be issued as rewards to get people to behave in certain ways. So in the case of DNN, we have this entire review layer where writers can submit articles to our system, and people can participate in vetting the articles. So using the blockchain, we actually issue you token rewards for participating in various degrees of vetting and various degrees of getting publishing articles on our system as well. And then in addition to that, the articles themselves are stored on the blockchain itself. So, if there's, a jurisdiction or a government doesn't like, not necessarily government, but just any organization or anybody that's trying to get an article taken down, they wouldn't be able to do so. So, it's very appealing to those places where censorship is a real problem. DNN's a great platform to not feel pressured in, publishing things that are factual.
And I'm curious, we've talked a lot about fake news and echo chambers so far, and the role of readers keeping our media organizations accountable is really important, right? And we've seen, on both sides of the political spectrum, we see media outlets on the right that are being challenged by those that are maybe more left-wing, and vice versa. And the role of the reader in many ways today is to keep news organizations and reporters and the like accountable, right? And so I'm curious why you believe accountable news that answers to the reader is so important in this age of being in a post-truth era.
So accountability, I mean, it doesn't just stop at the writer. Obviously, the writer's accountable to deliver the facts and not basically twist what's happened when it comes to certain events that they're covering. But obviously, accountability is also something that is responsibility of the reader as well. I feel like we as readers, especially in recent years, we've just become passive consumers of the news, and we kind of just take what's given to us and accept it as the word of said publication. So as far as accountability is concerned, it's important for, of course, all parties to be accountable, so we can open up that bigger sphere of discussion around the topics that matter to us the most. Not only to just open up that dialogue, as we were talking about earlier, but also just to shed additional light on important issues that we read about on a daily basis. And as far as DNN is concerned, we do have this economic structure in place where writers are incentivized to churn out good content for the network, but the same also applies to reviewers and readers on the network as well. Readers are, in fact, rewarded for suggesting topics to writers or flagging articles for potential inaccuracies and possibly putting them into a second round review, so to speak. So accountability for all parties, I feel, is definitely a must, just so we can kind of eliminate the barriers or like our own personal biases getting in the way when it comes to constructing and consuming news.
And I'm curious, Dondre, how do you feel that DNN is different and is going to be different than the rest?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so DNN is more than just like a news organization, right? It's you know, it's involving the community and everything from publishing the article to checking for inaccuracies of the article to it's you know you can play different roles in DNN, right? So you know you can come to DNN as a reader, right? But if you find that there's a lot of inaccuracies or you find that this article lacks some sources, and you can become a reviewer, right? And then on the flip side, if you get new information, you can also write articles. So DNN's more than just a place to consume news. It's a place to be a part of the news, and make a difference.
And I think that's what makes DNN so exciting, especially in an era when it's hard to know sometimes when you read the news, and we've all done it. We've seen things on Facebook, news stories or supposed news stories on Facebook. I mean, the one that made me disappointed a few times, I've almost fallen for it, is stories about how Betty White had passed away.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. That was great.
And she's very much alive, very much not dead yet. And we all hope that day is very long before she passes away. It's Betty White, right? But I think that just shows that we can be susceptible to
absolutely
taking that information. And what I mean, I'm curious from both of you, has there been a time when you were tempted to believe a story that in fact was false or fake, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been cases where there's stuff that's been published and I fell for it. Actually, just sticking with like the crypto space, there's a recent article
all the time.
Yeah, there's a recent article that was published about, I believe, Amazon accepting Bitcoin, and I thoroughly thought that was legitimate. I thought that was true. Like there's a lot of people thought so. And then it turned out that it was not the case. So, I definitely fell for that one. And then, just the U.S. election entirely. Like, I honestly thought that Hillary was going to win. Everybody was reporting that she was like up like 80-something%. I thought that was the case. It turned out that it's exactly opposite. So,
Yeah, I'd like to add, like, one of the other interesting things is, of course, almost reading like left and right from every perspective, the impact of potential Russian meddling in U.S. affairs when it came to the election, so on and so forth. And I feel like us being, the general public, we don't truly know the full story. And, we're also reading a lot of articles that aren't really backed by any tangible facts. It's just, I don't necessarily know what's misinformation and what isn't. And I do feel that we're extremely susceptible to believing, let's call it alternative facts, if you want. And it's not even so much that we want to believe them. This also ties into the rise of like sensationalistic articles that are mostly, representing events that are grossly misrepresented or blatantly wrong. We're also driven to share them, with people from our network because we love sensationalism and we love clickbait. We love, bombastic headlines. It's like one of the biggest things, when you discuss the impact of Facebook on news consumption. I read a statistic the other day, and it was, I forget what the exact percentage was, but it was something around like 60% of people in the U.S. have admitted to sharing a fake news story that they didn't know was fake at the time. And it's pretty crazy to think about how rampant this issue is, because the moment an article comes out that's like even, the least bit sensationalistic and also blatantly false in hindsight, it's shared instantly. And fake news also tends to spread like a virus really, really fast. And social media sort of like perpetuates that. But I think, we're just really susceptible because at the same time, like I said earlier, I do feel like we become passive consumers of news, and we aren't taking as big a role as readers as we should be due to, whatever circumstances.
So I'm curious, you had touched on the phrase alternative facts, and I'm curious, ultimately, who do you believe are responsible for combating the rise of alternative facts? And I just wanted to note as well is that even the phrase alternative facts, I mean, I remember, I believe it was in January of this year during a CNN interview that the counselor to the president in the United States, Kellyanne Conway, she mentions this phrase, and it seemed strange to me, to hear this phrase, because she said she had alluded to the fact that that they wanted to share the alternative facts from what CNN was talking about. So I guess I posed you the question: who's ultimately responsible for combating whether you call it fake news, alternative facts? Who's responsible for combating that?
I mean, I feel like all of us together, but the readers definitely. It would be great if we as readers had more power in identifying, what was fact and what was fiction. Of course, it's easier said than done, but a lot of it, it ends with the reader. We need to at least be given the tools to be able to identify something, as we're reading it. And I also feel that it comes down to the overall agendas of publications. I think that's probably the single biggest aspect entirely. A lot of these, especially the bigger corporations when it comes to news, they're tied to larger political agendas, hence they put out the type of content they put. You look at Fox. They're very predictably conservative for their audience, and then you look at something like CNN, which is a very predictably liberal entity. And both of these entities, they might put out content that's every now and then the opposite of what they normally preach, but what they put out is meant to pander to their audience, because especially these bigger companies, like I said, they're tied to these bigger agendas, and I feel it really comes down to that. You need structure in place where you aren't tied to I guess any bigger plan for the type of content that you put out. And so independent publications have been a little more successful in that regard, and I definitely see DNN helping in that in that aspect as well. Just considering its overall decentralized nature, that no one owns any piece of the pie, and like there's no bigger individual in place that's like running the whole operation. Even Dondre and I, it's like we're kind of more behind the scenes, and considering that nodes can be hosted running individual spin-offs of DNN, there's no system of like overall ownership for one individual. So I do feel that creates a more democratic system when it comes to news creation, when you have this decentralized nature, and I think that will play a huge part in being able to disseminate news that's factual and well balanced.
Yeah, and also I want to add, definitely, intent is a huge part of this, right? So, when people throw around this term fake news, right? Fake news isn't something that's factual that you don't agree with. Like, I think that's been like a common thing, people labeling things fake news, and a lot of people do it, on Twitter, on various social platforms, that's fake news, right? But it might not be fake news when you follow the sources, when you figure out what's actually going on. So, I think what DNN has to offer is, a way for people to, put emphasis on the sources, put emphasis on the construction of the article, rather than trying to get the eyeballs.
And have opposing perspectives.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess in part of this conversation is we see nowadays so many news sites are using clickbait headlines, and I like to glance through multiple different media sources, but there are many people out there, and you mentioned the stat earlier, Sumit, that a large percentage of Americans got their news during the U.S. presidential election straight from Facebook.
Yeah.
Right. And how do you have suggestions on, as a reader, you see something, it doesn't really sound right, it sounds off. What are readers supposed to do? I mean, obviously besides going to DNN and getting your news through DNN, which people should definitely do. But besides that, what other suggestions do you have?
The big part of it is to, look at all the different sides to the issue, right? So if you're, if you, in the U.S., if you get a lot of your news from like MSNBC, right, venture to the other side and see what they're saying. If one side is saying that, a catastrophe is about to unfold tomorrow, but the other side is saying, well, not necessarily, some things have been misinterpreted. then there's something going on there, right? You have to, as a reader, be able to, take all the sides.
Investigate.
Yeah, investigate. Don't take the word of just, one organization. Be skeptical and, venture for, what's the truth. So yeah, I mean, definitely you got to be more active, more proactive in figuring out, all the sides.
Yeah, and in terms of like more specifically with just DNN, there are economic incentives in place for readers to actively look for inaccuracies, that there's anything that doesn't seem right in an article, and pointing it out to the writers, to the network of reviewers. So an article can be given a second look and essentially fixed and republished on the network.
Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to quickly make sure that anyone who's watching has a chance to connect, ask questions, get involved in this conversation. So can you remind people your Twitter handle, and any other platform that people can connect with us while we're having this conversation?
So absolutely, for anyone who's watching, feel free to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is DNN_blockchain. Slack is definitely the best place to reach us by far, in terms of we have a lot of communication back and forth with people on Slack, slack.dnn.media, and our website for more information, dnn.media. So we also have a Telegram channel as well, and I would say those are probably the 4 best places to visit for more information, or just communicating with Andre and I back and forth. We're pretty responsive, and we just love talking about this.
Yeah, and this whole project is very much involves a community in every angle, right, from development to really testing the review process. So if you have suggestions, or if you want to contribute in any way, you feel like maybe the review process could be modified in this way, or there might be some things that you see that don't work, definitely join our Slack, ask us any questions you have.
So if anyone has any questions, make sure you comment or send us a tweet, get involved in the conversation. And in the meantime, we had a couple more questions for you, and I'm curious how DNN is different than the average citizen journalist who might be spreading off ideas and on their blog, on social media. How is DNN different than those kinds of sites?
So there are a few fundamental differences. First and foremost, I want to start with these economic incentives, these rewards. When you're writing on Medium or consuming content on Medium, there's no reward. You're just doing it because you want it, which is totally fine. But on DNN, you have this whole layer of tokenization facilitated by the Ethereum blockchain, and you could essentially be rewarded for your individual contributions on the network, and make your effort and your work for DNN worth something. So that's definitely one of the big differences, this whole structure of incentives and penalties that we put into place. And secondly, I would say one of the biggest things is the review process for DNN as a whole. You look at a Medium, or you look at a Facebook, or any other citizen journalism platform, there is no secondary layer of review. If you put something on Facebook, I can put out a lie right now and get it published in the feed without any issue. That's one of the biggest problems I see right now publishing when it comes to the whole citizen journalism aspect. Publishing has become an act it's too simple. Because it's so instantaneous, and it's made us more susceptible to not only consuming news that's blatantly false, but also sharing it. So I'd say that one of the biggest things about DNN is that review process. There's a layer that you have to get through before a piece of content gets published. So I, as a writer, would have to whip up an article and submit to the network, which it gets submitted to this this randomized set of reviewers on DNN who actually have to vet the article and authorize it based on our editorial guidelines before it gets published in the network. So you have this, like I said, this additional layer which helps to ensure that what's getting published is of absolute quality.
Yeah, and I also want to put emphasis on the whole penalizing. So we have this whole elaborate reputation system. So every user on the platform, whether you're a reader, reviewer, or a writer, you have a form of reputation. And your contribution in how positive that influences what gets published, and basically checking to see how factually integral something is, you get either positive or negative reputation. So, for example, if you're a writer and you're trying to get articles published that have a tilt or are not sourced properly, that negatively influences your reputation, and therefore any subsequent articles affect your reward. So this whole type of system, it also applies to reviewers. If you're a reviewer and you just like a particular topic and you want to keep accepting it or keep rejecting it, that also has implications on your reputation. So the way it is on current systems, like Sam was saying, publishing is very easy. Once it's out there, right? You get rewarded regardless just by the attention that the article draws. And if it's false, you don't really lose much. So it kind of comes down to the way the network is designed. I tell people all the time that the way Facebook and a lot of these social networks are designed, they're designed to show you things based on activity. Right? And that's a fundamental difference with DNN. It's not about activity. It's about this due diligence. It's about positive contributions towards DNN's main goal of pumping out factual content.
So, Simon, I'm curious to hear from you about whether you think DNN is on a collision course with some of the big media companies like CNN, New York Times. Let me know what you think of. Is DNN on the road to being on the collision course with competing with these big guns?
I would say yes and no. I wouldn't necessarily say collision course per se, but there is some element of competition since we're kind of all vying for the attention of readers in that sense. So it's more of like a very general level of competition. But actually, what's even more promising when it comes to bigger mainstream media entities is there are ways that DNN could work with them. And we could kind of just better everything, together. One of the biggest things that Donovan and I have talked about a lot is fact checking as a service. If we're able to develop the review process to be robust enough that very few articles that shouldn't be published slip through the cracks, if it's proven to be quality on the platform when writers are getting articles published, it could be something that's applied to the content outside of DNN. We could sort of look at articles that are about to be published by bigger mainstream media entities and kind of have the review process comb through it and have all of that go to work on its own, given DNN's own little seal of approval, so to speak. That can be really, really intriguing down the line. It's sort of fact checking as a service. It's something we've talked about a lot. So I don't necessarily see us competing too heavily with mainstream media, aside from just general level of competition. I definitely see opportunities for collaboration as well.
So we actually have a question from the audience that I want to ask both of you. This audience person asked, based on what you said about the vetting process, how will DNN compete with, say, Twitter for the speed of breaking news?
Yeah, so breaking news is definitely an interesting thing. It all comes down to being at the right place and getting the information first, right? I guess when it comes to breaking news, I guess you got to kind of just think about what are the facts around that issue. So it's nice to report something first, but if what you're reporting is false, then that goes against DNN's principle. So we want to be first, but we want to be factual in what we're saying. So, in that regard, we kind of like to take the approach of, say a Wikipedia, right? So, when something comes out on Wikipedia, whether it's, a word gets released to somebody or something needs to be updated on Wikipedia, they take the most factually representative sources at that time, and then they publish what needs to be published or updates what needs to be updated. So we kind of want to take that approach, as new information. The beauty of DNN's review process is as new facts become available, the reader can point out those inaccuracies at a later time, saying that this is no longer factual, this source was proven, was retracted, is what they're saying. So at a later time, we do incentivize that. So you shouldn't think of the review process as this very rigid, one-time thing. It's a cycle of as facts become available, articles that represent those facts. And what we're hoping to happen is that DNN's review process will over time get quicker, right? So that's why we put a huge emphasis on getting people more involved. Because the more DNN's network grows, the faster news can get as we scale.
Yeah, we've also talked a lot about, I just want to quickly add, potentially how we could partner with news agencies and, get certain things before others and sort of, break them quickly. Twitter is incredible for breaking the news, but, one of the biggest flaws with Twitter is, there have also been instances where Twitter's also been responsible for the spreading of misinformation as well. And not even necessarily intentionally. It's not like it's Twitter itself doing it, but it's the users. Since everything is so quick and instantaneous and things spread so quickly on platforms like Twitter and Facebook, I would definitely just like to extend a little more of what Andre was saying. I do like the approach specifically. We take a lot of inspiration from like how quickly Wikipedia is able to like add stuff and ensure that what they add is in fact accurate before they add it. So while we may not necessarily, at least in the initial stage of DNN's development, be able to break news like first, once we do put something out as quickly as we can, we'll make sure that it's like really bulletproof in terms of being well balanced and accurate. But down the line, I do want us to be like to getting into the aspect of breaking news as quickly as we can and trying to be some of the first people to break something, as long as we can make sure that the review process, is quick enough, and that's something we want to make more and more efficient over time.
So just before I forget, I should have said that question was from a user with the handle Tribe Trader, and we have a question from Nathan Dunn, and he asks if articles stored on a blockchain can't be removed or censored, how are users able to point out and correct inaccurate or inconsistent material?
Yeah, it's a great question. So articles can't be taken down, but that doesn't mean that they can't be amended in a newer version. So, for example, if some inaccuracy was pointed out in the first version of the article, meaning it got published the first time, that's version 1. If you find inaccuracies in that article, it goes back into our review. That's technically like the second version. So the same contents of that article gets published again. And the way our front-end system is designed is it checks for the latest versions of that article that gets published. So
I just want to quickly add, this is why we love the blockchain so much. Like, it's true. Obviously, once an article gets published in the chain, it can't be taken down or tampered with at all, like in any way. But that's also where the beauty of it lies. If something is in fact an accurate article and is flagged as such, we can essentially place that article with a different version, at least on the front end, for the reader to see. But behind the scenes on the chain, every single revision of that article is all there, and you can actually like look at all of that in a very transparent way. It's incredible to just think about. Like you can trace an article from publication and down to like every single change that's been made in a way that's fully transparent and can't be tampered with.
So we actually have one more question from the audience, and then we will wrap this conversation up. And it comes from a user with the handle the Market Anarchist, and he asks, or she asks, how can you gain enough users and journalists to be competitive with other news agencies?
So I mean, it's a balance. So I mean, we definitely want to like do a lot of outreach to any writers, to any potential writers, to any people that are interested in reviewing. It's going to be a process. Like from day one, we're not trying to say that we're going to take down all the news organizations. We're going after them. It's very much a part of the community and involving them and building up awareness. As we begin to develop and start testing the review process more in depth using the community, we're definitely going to put a lot of emphasis on doing a lot of outreach, whether it's from independent journalists or from news writers or from even reviewers that are on Wikipedia, doing it for just volunteering their time, it would be nice if they can come here and get go to DNN, vet news articles, and be rewarded for doing so. So
yeah, one of the interesting things is there are so many high-quality writers out there who aren't necessarily journalists per se, who would be a great fit on DNN, especially a lot of the great writers that we see on a day-to-day basis on platforms like Medium. I think they would be a great fit for us. And we have a lot of different channels to draw from so we can kind of like scale up accordingly based on the amount of content that's coming in. So, you know, like Andre said, it'll definitely be a process, but I do see us down the line having enough people on board as far as the community is concerned to be able to put out a high volume of content in a respectable amount of time. It also depends on how efficient we can make the review process too. That's something we definitely want to focus on as we build the beta. We want to like sort of like establish like different test groups that we can test different approaches with as far as like what makes the most efficient review process, because obviously writers will want their stuff to be published as quickly as possible, but we also need to make sure the content is in fact, you know, quality content that can be published on DNN. So a lot of it comes down to how efficient we can make the review process and incentivize writers to you know, contribute articles to the network, but also, you know, all the different types of channels we can draw writers from. You know, I feel like there are a lot of good content creators in, again, a lot of different places that we could draw from.
So I have one last question, and then we will wrap up the conversation. I asked this question, maybe if you could finish both of you could finish the sentence for me. Journalism is important because?
Yeah, journalism is important because, you know, it twofold. You know, it holds people accountable for what goes on. And also, you know, it's just a way for people to get involved in figuring out what's going on. So, you know, one of the great things about journalism, you know, a lot of things that go on in this world, you know, there is no person sometimes that can point out, you know, hold somebody accountable, whether they're a politician, whether they're, you know, a celebrity. You know, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. I think what journalism brings to the table is this way for the public, you know, to hold them accountable and to express their thoughts, you know, through a medium like this.
Yeah, journalism is important because it really sheds light on the issues that are important to us. And, you know, where would we be, you know, without it as far as being informed on a daily basis? And, you know, there are times when, you know, journalists are also, it's interesting because you have this aspect where, you know, the mass media is constantly under attack. You know, we're also, you know, at a new low when it comes to the U.S. Very few Americans have a reasonable amount of trust in the mass media to deliver the facts. So journalists, to some degree, are under fire. And you know, we also sometimes forget that, you know, especially when you look at, you know, the bigger investigative journalists, they do shed light on a lot of issues that we wouldn't otherwise know about. And it's really coming down to us kind of all working together and figuring out a way of how we could better improve, you know, the way that news is created, because it's an issue. But, you know, if we're all able to establish an open dialogue about, you know, what's wrong in the first place, then we can, you know, get together and fix it.
So you mentioned all of us working together. I have to ask the two of you, how do people support DNN if they wish to disrupt the current media landscape?
Yeah, so, I mean, we have plenty of different roles that you can fulfill, right? You can be a reader, you can be a reviewer, you can be a writer. But, you know, as we develop the platform, you know, because the platform's not fully out there yet, we definitely are looking for, like, testers. You know, we also want you to bring any new ideas as a writer from, you know, the journalism industry. You know, if you feel that, you know, maybe editor could be, you know, modified in a certain way that's more appealing to you to write articles, then yeah, by all means, you know, be a part of what we're doing.
Yeah, I do want to quickly add, we will be conducting a private pre-sale and public crowd sale, the details of which we will announce very soon. So if anyone's interested in being a contributor to DNN's cause, then we absolutely love to sort of, you know, have this you know, dialogue about, you know, of course, how we want to build out DNN in the long term and, you know, cultivate this network. But we'll have those details out very soon for whoever's curious. I know we get those questions a lot lately, of course, and we're definitely looking forward to making those announcements when we do so.
This is, and for people who are watching, if you want to get in touch with DNN, make sure you check out their website at www.dnn.media. This concludes our conversation, and it's been a great conversation to have audience interaction, to have learn a bit more about DNN, and we're thrilled that this is just the first of a series of town hall events that DNN will be hosting over the course of the next couple of weeks. And for those who are interested, stay tuned for details. Our next town hall is Friday, November the 10th, and make sure you stay engaged with us. And with that, have a great weekend, and we'll see hopefully everyone and more people on November the 10th.